Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan, joined by most valuable Pete. Hey, Pete, what's up today?
Not much. How are you?
Oh, I'm good today because it is our weekly stream or skip segment. Regular listeners definitely know the rules, but for the newbies, maybe you can just summarize it 15 seconds or less what stream or skip is all about.
Absolutely. So Ethan and I have prepared lists of TV shows and movies we'd like each other to watch. Every week, we randomly assign each other one of those programs. We watch at least 2 episodes or 30 minutes if it's a feature-length show. And then on that basis, we determine if that show is worthy of being streamed or skipped.
I mean, now that we are closing in on the end of 2023, we have really had some high highs and some low lows. We've had, of course, as always, some stuff in between, but that's really the MO of stream or skip, is that sometimes we've unlocked something that we never would have imagined that we would have liked. And sometimes something that we are really enthusiastic for turns out to be a dud, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this week, I had a show on Netflix called Who is Erin Carter? It came out in 2023. Let me summarize as follows. A lady named Erin Carter, of course, is a British teacher. We find her living in Spain, and there's a little bit of exposition that kind of leads us as the audience to believe that she is trying to keep a low profile, that there's something in her past. We don't know exactly what, but it hits you pretty clearly in the first episode that, like, she's trying not to, make any waves, ruffle any feathers, call unnecessary attention to herself. I kind of thought maybe she's in like witness protection program, or she's on the run or something. Anyway, she is a substitute teacher at what we would call a primary school. She's got a young daughter who's very sweet. And one afternoon, she goes into the supermarket and there's an armed robbery. She finds herself in the middle of it, and she turns into John Wick, Jason Bourne, someone like that, takes out all the robbers in a very, very effective and kind of brutal way, right? Like, she's a fighter. She grabs the dude's gun, like unloads on him. And everyone in the supermarket, like, the clerk and some other customers are like, whoa, like, that was really impressive. So much so that there's a small news story on her, and we see that she's trying to do everything she can to try to downplay this. Oh, it was just instincts or reflexes, or it wasn't really me, trying to get the story canceled. But we learn that apparently Erin Carter is somehow wanted by like some mob or mafia or something. And now that she's made headlines in this story, first, the community is like aghast that this mild-mannered substitute teacher, was like stabbing people, slitting their throats, grabbing them and like flipping them over her shoulder and so forth. So there's some level of like kind of disbelief or admiration for her. And now we see that there's kind of like a group that is now coming into her city, and they're trying to, get in touch with her. That's where I am at the end of episode 1 and 2. I'm expecting that if I would continue this until the end, and there are 7 episodes, that there would definitely be, well, first of all, there has to be a reveal. And I'm assuming that there's going to be some level of plot twist, whether it's she used to be married to, her husband used to be in the mob, or she used to be a hit woman, or she witnessed something. There's not that many possibilities, right? And of course, she's going to fight everybody. She's going to take them all out. She's going to be victorious after her blood splatters everywhere and so forth. It seems like it's going to be a little bit violent and gruesome. Not John Wickian, but in the same vein. My sense is after 2 episodes, there's nothing really interesting or unique about this show. Even Ahmed, she's definitely like compelling enough. Like she's definitely a very good actress. She's very pretty, but doesn't have like this charisma that's like really carrying the show. And the show itself just feels like a little bit tired and retread. I mean, we've kind of seen this before so many times, right? I mean, Jason Bourne, he loses his memory and we find out that he's an assassin. You know, John Wick, which we've just seen so many episodes of, and now there's, you know, the Continental as well. You know, he thinks he's out and he gets sucked back in. Equalizer, right? I mean, this is not really a new storyline, and it just isn't really compelling enough to keep me watching. I don't feel like the big reveal is going to be so dramatic. It's not so wow in your face in terms of like her sexuality or something that you're watching just because it's kind of like a guilty pleasure. She's not a star like we've seen with kind of like J-Lo in, I think, a movie like this. We saw, what's the lady from the West Wing that we saw in a movie like this? There just isn't enough to really keep me going. I gave it 2 episodes. Still, they haven't given me the big reveal, which I think is probably right. There's no reason to like blow your wad like at the very beginning of the series, but definitely it's just not that compelling to me. Like I've got to watch one more episode and find out like what she's wanted for, how they know her, what she's going to do to escape. So, who is Erin Carter on Netflix earns a skip from me.
Okay, I mean, I had high hopes for it for a couple of reasons. One, it's been on the Netflix top 10 list, right? It's been trending.
Yeah, it has.
And
Yeah.
two, I mean, at least on paper, even though it's something we've seen before, it's not a bad premise, or it's not a super tired premise where you have this seemingly innocuous spy, or maybe not spy, but spy-esque figure who's like a normal day-to-day person, and we find out that that person is actually a super agent or something like that.
I agree. I mean, it's a tried. I mean, I guess I'll walk it back a little bit. Your point has some relevance, which is, yes, it's a tried and tested trope. It is popular. Generally, I think the more popular ones are when it's someone that you don't necessarily see as like a fighter.
Absolutely. Bob Odenkirk.
Oh, great example. Nobody. That's part of it. I mean, this lady is young and she's definitely pretty and she's slight. She's not physically imposing. They play that up a little bit. And the fact that she's a substitute teacher, again, tries to demonstrate that she's a little bit mild-mannered and not like disposed to like a very violent lifestyle. I definitely take your point. I mean, that has some validity, which is it is a tried and tested, you know, storyline. And if it's done well, Odenkirk's a great example. You know, it's super exciting to watch. But if it's not, and in this case, I'm not sure if it's because she's not a big enough star, but I feel like it's not necessarily her. I feel like there's just not enough like giddy up in the plot. You know, like I feel like I'm waiting. I'm not really getting anything, and it just feels like it's plodding along a little bit too much. And
no, I take your point. Sometimes a slow burn is good because you anticipate that the payoff is going to be worth it. But sometimes you can tell when a slow burn is just not going to pay off, or at least your instincts kick in, and you're just like, well, if I'm not excited, then what's the point? Even if the reveal is good. Again, 7 episodes is a long time for someone to waste for potentially a bad payoff.
I agree. So anyway, that is Who is Erin Carter on Netflix. And I have, unfortunately, despite your high expectations, given it a skip.
Boo. Sorry to hear that.
Boo. Can you pick us up this week?
Unfortunately, I cannot. I have a show called The Gryphon on Amazon Prime. The Gryphon, it's a German series. It's a fantasy series based on a novel called The Gryphon, or Der Grief, or whatever it is in German. And it seems like a supernatural-esque fantasy series. And it's got that really old school trope where you start off with a flashback where you have a pair of siblings who are just minding their own business at home. And then all of a sudden, the father comes in all, frazzled. And he's like, pack your bags. We got to go. Something's wrong. And then he packs up a book called The Chronicle. Guard this with your life. We're being chased by supernatural things. And of course, both children have no idea what's going on. The younger one starts panicking. The older one takes care of the younger one. And then the father gets them into the car and he's like, no matter what happens to me, protect your brother, take care of him.
This seems like one of the old, well, that escalated quickly.
Well, yes. And it's, that classic trope that we see in so many movies. Like that was the flashback. The flashback ends and then you move to the present day. Both the boys are much older now. The younger one is now 16 in high school. Yeah. And the older one was expelled from high school. We learn why.
Yeah.
So it's set in the early 90s. And I have to say it's super nostalgic for a couple of things. One, because the younger boy has a pair of earphones that come in. Do you remember those Sony earphones that came in the round plastic case that you could rotate inside so that the wire wrapped up around the case?
Oh, yeah.
So he gets that for his 16th birthday. The soundtrack is great. It's Soundgarden. It's all these classic 90s pop songs that we used to hear and alt rock songs from our high school days. So you see that the kid is an outcast, but not quite. And there are stories and rumors around him because his older brother got kicked out of school and he's going to a psychiatrist because he has very dramatic and very potent dreams at night, which of course we learn aren't dreams, but they're visions of an alternate future or an alternate history, because of course they are, right? And then we learn that the older brother kind of ran away from home after he got expelled from school because he believed his father was working on something truly, let's say, revolutionary, and that he believed his father. And his father was a part of this ancient bloodline that was there to defend humanity. And he believes that. And of course, their mother doesn't. That's why they got divorced. And the father has now been missing for decades. The younger brothers, it's his 16th birthday. And of course, when you're 16, it's the
you get inducted.
You become inducted into the group. And he's like, you're a man now. And so kind of they're like, okay, well, here's the Chronicle. He gives them that book from that flashback. He's like, you have to sign it because your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, me, and now we all signed it. And you can see all the men in his family have signed that book. And they all have strikingly similar signatures. And, when he signs it, all of a sudden he passes out because he starts getting visions from the book. And then that book is potentially a portal to another world. And the whole point is that this is called a Gryphon because there's this evil monster that's a Gryphon, right? It's this bird-like creature. And their family is the only thing defending humanity from that monster. And the monster is trying to kill the entire bloodline because it needs their blood to survive or some nonsense like that. I don't know.
Some of this doesn't sound bad, actually, but I feel like you're going to tell me it's bad.
On paper, it sounds more compelling than it does when you see it on screen. And I think it's because there's so many tropes on screen that we've seen before, and it doesn't really do anything different. The therapist, for example, he's this guy who just flat out looks like he's a bad guy, and he's kind of psychoanalyzing and therapizing this little kid. I'm willing to put up $100, dirham, pounds, you name the currency, I'm ready to put it up right now. And I bet you that before the end of this first season, we're going to learn that he's actually a bad guy who's been secretly suppressing the younger boy.
You got it.
You know what I mean? That's the kind of trope that you're seeing.
Yep.
Those are the kinds of twists and reveals that would make this show fantastic, except for the fact that this is so obviously telegraphed.
Yeah.
It just seems very obvious to me. So there's a lot of reasons why on paper it should be a good show, but I think that coupled with the fact that it's in German,
Yeah.
it just didn't stack up to me. The visual effects initially looked pretty good, but by the second episode, like you could tell the CGI wasn't looking fantastic. That's fair enough. It's a TV show. It's not a movie.
You know what this made me think of when you described it at the beginning? Black Widow and her sister Yelena.
Yeah.
Remember at the beginning of that movie, her dad was kind of like driving all over the place. He's like, we got to leave. We got to get in the car. Then they went to an airfield. Right. Then he got on the plane and then
the family gets separated at the airstrip.
Yeah. And I thought of that movie. I mean, I love that movie, by the way, but when I was watching that opening scene, I was like, kill me now. This is miserable. Is this really where this is going to go? But that movie redeemed itself at the end. That opening trope I thought was so blasé. It did nothing for me, right? Because it's just unrealistic.
And we've seen that so often. I think that a better way to circumvent that trope is to start earlier, which is to say, hey, we're going to show you that these guys are spies from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because any sophisticated audience, and most audience members today are sophisticated, because we've seen these shows time and time again, show us the cards from the get-go, right? Show us that David Harbour is being recruited by the KGB to become a sleeper agent in America from the get-go as a part of that. Then it's less of a letdown, let's put it that way.
Yeah. It just seems like you and I don't have kids, so we definitely should not be providing parental advice on this podcast. But if we did, I would expect that one thing we would not say to the kid is, hey, if I die, make sure you take care of your younger brother or younger sister. You're creating panic almost unnecessarily in your kid's life. Like how can any of your kids possibly grow up to be like well-adjusted adults when that's kind of like the way that they remember their father's departure? This panicked, frantic instruction to take care of your brother no matter what. What do you expect from these people? It'd be much better if they're like, hey, why don't you just go inside and get an ice cream and I'll be there in 5 minutes. And then the kids always thought the dad never came out and abandoned them. Seems a little bit less traumatic than.
What's another good way to circumvent that is what if the parents aren't in on it at all and it's the kids who are the spies? So the 13-year-old spy or 14-year-old spy is integrated in the family, and she's like, you're going to pose as a kid, as a normal adopted kid, and in your off time, you're going to go and do that.
Dude, you've never watched my favorite show, The Americans.
I haven't, no.
Spoiler alert, the way that they became Russians in the US was that they faked a car accident and the parents died. And the kid who also died, they put her in dramatic bandages and they replaced her with a Russian child and said to the aunt and uncle, oh, the little girl survived.
Oh, well, there you go.
And that's how they put a Russian child sleeper agent who became a naturalized American citizen then, right?
Yeah.
But can you imagine saying that to kids are pretty inherently untrustworthy, right?
Yeah.
What level of sophistication were you at age, let's just say 13, where someone's like, hey, I know you have no patriotism whatsoever, and all you care about is this. But just so you know, for the rest of your life, this is your job. You got to fake it. And we're going to ask you to do some really, really shitty, horrible things. It's not going to be fun or enjoyable, but you'll do it for Mother Russia or Mother whatever, right?
I was trying to sneak into R-rated movies at 13.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to sneak into a nuclear facility.
I agree. I absolutely did not have the maturity to handle an instruction like that, right?
Yeah. Not at all.
But that's how they did it. But your trope is spot on in that way.
Okay, so that's 2 skips this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your rating? But it's pretty clear you're going to get a skip.
Yeah, look, I think I'd have more patience for it if I were maybe younger and if I hadn't seen so many fantasy shows in the past. But it was trope after trope. It reminded me of other shows. There's a lot of corollaries to this show and Supernatural, which I enjoyed very much when it was on air. I think that other shows have done a better job of it, hence why it's a skip for it.
Let me ask you a question, though, conceptually. When a show based on a book does not really hit the mark, do you think it's because the showrunner is trying to be too true to the book, or the showrunner is straying too far from the story in the book?
It totally depends, actually. The best example is probably Lord of the Rings and Rings of Power.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, very true to the Tolkien estate and the books, from what I've heard. Apparently, Peter Jackson took tremendous care with the Tolkien estate to make the movies, the trilogy, very true to the books. Rings of Power, for example, I've heard that the Tolkien estate is very unhappy with Amazon because the showrunners have said, well, we bought the rights, we can do whatever the heck we want with it.
That's a very good example, though. Yeah.
So I honestly don't know. I think with movies or TV series based on books, it's hit or miss. I'm a huge fan of Greek mythology, and I was a very big fan of the young adult series, the Percy Jackson book, even though I'm much older than the Percy Jackson book's target demographic. Because I'm a huge fan of Greek mythology, I loved all those books, but none of the Percy Jackson movies did well in the theaters. And Rick Riordan has been trying desperately to make this a proper TV series. I think Disney is now releasing it as a proper series now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's coming out next year. So fingers crossed.
That makes sense for Disney. That makes sense for Disney.
It's totally the right move for Disney.
Yeah. They also need something, not just because of how popular that is, but they desperately need something to get away from the
MCU and Star Wars.
The MCU and Star Wars, right?
Both of which are facing a raft of controversy as it is.
I cannot say enough positive things about Loki, though.
Right? The ending was fantastic.
Oh, that last episode was the MCU at its finest. I would almost argue that season-ending episode of season 2 was among the finest work that Disney has done.
So it accomplished two things. One, as an arc for Loki and Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
Wonderful arc all the way back from Thor 1 through these two TV series.
Yeah.
I thought they did a fantastic job. And
totally
two, they really buttoned up the Jonathan Majors issue. If they want to get away from it, this is perfect. If they wanted to walk away from Jonathan Majors, which is still to be determined, they can now. Like, they can fundamentally say, hey, you know what? We're scrapping the next two Avengers movies. We'll make somebody else the big bad. And I'm fine with that because they did it in a very organic way.
Could they have made him a more annoying character?
Victor Timely?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Like, if they're trying to make him more annoying, do you think that they could have?
I have no idea. But like,
do you think it was intentional? Do you think they're like, hey, let's just make this guy unlikable so that actually no one is clamoring for him to come back? That seems very nefarious.
Yeah, well, no, because if you think about it that way, Victor Timely was terrible, but then we saw He Who Remains again.
Yeah.
And he was fantastic.
Yeah, He Who Remains is much better than Victor Timely.
Exactly, which is why I thought that, this is actually a good way for them to go.
Yeah.
I thought this was a great way.
But I have to say, that episode, who's the guy who plays Obi?
Hiddleston?
No, short stuff in
Indiana Jones. One.
Yeah, fantastic. The way that him and Hiddleston interacted, it's so fantastic.
Yeah.
I cannot say enough. If you haven't seen Loki, certainly it's exceptional. It's a must subscribe, right? We've never done it as a streamer skip, but we both watched it, and I just thought that last episode was all the more frustrating why, the Marvels was so poorly written with very little, if any, comedic levity. And then you watch Loki and you see, like, look, they've still got writers who are funny. They've still got the ability to be so clever and humorous. It's really frustrating why they can't, make that translate to the big screen for some of their recent stuff. So, Pete, this week's streamer skip, heavy on the skip. What do we have on tap?
You're going to be on Peacock, and you're watching a show called Girls 5 Eva.
What? Girls 5 Eva?
Yeah, it's written by Tina Fey. If you've
Tina
watched
Fey.
30 Rock, it's in
Yeah.
that same vein of humor because that's how her sense of humor is.
True.
So generally speaking, I
Parks
think
and
that's
Rec.
very funny. Parks and Rec-esque, that sort of sense of humor.
So funny.
I'm hoping it's good.
Yeah.
I don't know because the subject matter is different, but in terms of the humor, I hope it's good.
Okay.
I am on Max and I'll be watching a controversial for whatever reason. I don't know what it's about, but I know that it raised a lot of controversy. I'll be watching a show called The Idol.
The Idol?
Yeah.
With who?
No idea. I don't know anything about this show. I just know that it caused a ruckus. I'm intrigued to see where the show goes.
All right, so stay tuned for Girls 5 Eva. And you've got The Idol.
Indeed. But in the meantime, I have a simple request for our listeners. If you have any feedback for us, if you have any shows you'd like us to watch, if you have thoughts about the Gryphon or Who's Erin Carter or Girls 5 Eva or The Idol, reach out to us, tweet at us at F&S Podcast, DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast, email us aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com, or the best thing you can do, like this video, leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be the first to know when the next episode of the Films and Stuff Podcast drops.
All right, everybody. Pete, thank you once again. Listeners, thank you for your time and attention, and we shall see you next week on our next episode of the Films and Stuff Podcast.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.